Hello, it's Friday the 24th of February. I am Massey, and this is the UK Column News. On Friday the 17th of February, Scottish Sheriff Principal Edward Bowen sentenced Robert Green to 1 year in prison, having found him guilty at a previous hearing on a breach of the peace charge and for breaking his bail conditions. Robert Green has been leading the campaign in support of justice for Holly Greig. The court proceedings against him came as a result of his arrest for attempting to distribute leaflets while standing as a parliamentary candidate in Aberdeen at the last general election. Robert had been standing on the single issue of the alleged uninvestigated abuse of Holly Greig while she was a child. Aside from interfering with an open and free election, Robert's original arrest appears to be unlawful. The interdict preventing him from distributing the leaflets had not been served. The police in fact served it while he was in custody following his arrest. Since his arrest, Robert has been subject to numerous breaches of his human rights and repeated irregularities in the legal process, culminating in a trial presided over by a sheriff with what seems to be a clear conflict of interest, being the apparent professional friendship between Sheriff Bowen and Eilish Angelini. A complaint has been lodged with the Scottish Judicial Office. Robert is serving his time at Her Majesty's Prison, Aberdeen. In the meantime, the persecution of Anne and Holly Greig continues, and they have a further appearance at the Royal Courts of Justice on Friday the 2nd of March to fight Shropshire Social Services' continuing attempts to get Holly into care. So while the campaign to free Robert Green builds, the more immediate need is to support for Anne and Holly. We would like to ask everyone to join us at the Royal Courts of Justice in London at 10 a.m. on Friday the 2nd of March. As predicted by this very news programme, the proposals for the future regulation of the media are starting to break cover. The Financial Times, Sir David Bell's erstwhile newspaper, has reported the launch of what they call a radical and comprehensive new proposal for media regulation. The proposal is based around a body which will be called the Media Standards Authority. Participation in the Media Standards Authority system would apparently be voluntary and would be governed by a contract between media participants and the MSA. Regulation of participants would be based upon a so-called code of ethics, and the MSA would carry out regular audits to ensure compliance. The MSA would also be able to provide what is being described as pre-publication advice in so-called privacy cases. In the medium term, the aim would be for the MSA to form part of a comprehensive system for regulation of all types of media, including the internet. This proposal is broadly in line with our assessment of the outcome of the Leveson inquiry that the David Bell and Common Purpose Controlled Media Standards Trust will be the new media regulator, and that the ultimate aim is to regulate not only the mainstream media, but all media, including the internet. The question for the new Media Standards Authority will not be whether it is independent from the government or not, but whether it is independent of common purpose or not. If the MSA is simply the morphing of the Media Standards Trust into a new quango, then we will be left in the position that the media will become the mouthpiece for Cameron and Clegg's common purpose. Today sees the inaugural meeting of the Friends of Syria in Tunisia. The Friends of Syria group of countries is a direct response to the ineffectiveness of the United Nations to impose the desired regime change on Syria as a result of the refusal of Russia and China to play ball. The so-called international community is set up by the Friends of Syria as a mechanism for imposing its will without the UN. The situation in Syria is not as it is being presented by the mainstream media. While no one could wish to see a continuation of President Assad's response to the armed insurrection in his country, the fact is that the Syrian military is fighting against an armed insurrection which is being funded from abroad, with arms flowing into Syria from Turkey. The Friends of Syria has announced that it will issue a declaration today which calls for what it is calling the three pillars: the humanitarian pillar, the transition pillar, and the pressure and isolation pillar. For transition pillar, read regime change. The anti-Assad campaign is being driven from right here in Britain as part of the moves against Vladimir Putin. One of the first calls for the international intervention in Syria came from the Syrian National Council. The statement they issued was almost a word-for-word reprint of a document which came from the Henry Jackson Society, a think tank descended from the Round Table and committed to the principles of perpetual war and the end of the nation state. Principles absolutely supported by many within the British establishment, past and present, from Bertrand Russell, H.G. Wells and Julian Huxley, to Tony Blair, William Hague and David Cameron. It is the issue of the nation state and national security that is at stake here. While the deaths in Syria cannot be approved of, the fact is that no nation where Britain and the US have imposed regime change is in a better position today than before the international intervention. While the West vilifies Russia and China for refusing to support regime change in Syria, it is Russia's President Putin, in particular, who is speaking out in support of the idea of the nation state and national sovereignty. On the eve of Thursday's Armed Forces Day holiday in Russia, Putin visited the Tamanskaya motorized infantry brigade outside Moscow. Putin toured their facility, watched combat drills, and met with division and brigade commanders. Brigade Commander Colonel Timofeyev asked Mr. Putin, "Today, right now, not far from our borders, the countries that export democracy are destabilizing the military and political situation and expanding the hotbeds of tension, up to and including unleashing civil wars. How do you see the military-political scenarios for the development of events in the Near and Middle East, as well as the Trans-Caucasus? Isn't there a danger that this will spread, aggravating the situation in the south of our own country? What should our armed forces be ready for?" In reply, Putin said that following the collapse of the Soviet Union, the USA thought it could dictate whatever it wanted, anywhere in the world. Unfortunately, he continued, what you are talking about happens, the export of so-called orange revolutions. You can't export democracy. It has to grow within a country in its own soil. When somebody starts exporting something, in one way or another, it either doesn't work or it leads to some monstrous phenomena like that in Libya. Today there is intertribal fighting there, with dozens, if not hundreds of people dying. Do you see? The consequences of such a policy and such actions are regrettable and negative. In order to prevent such things in our country, we need to develop our own democratic institutions so that people feel like participants in political processes and understand that the formation of power and the main directions in economic and social policies depend on them. This is the key point. Putin concluded by saying, "We are not interested in, not planning to, and do not want to interfere in anyone else's affairs, but we are interested in a stable situation around Russia. Unfortunately, we have people who are ready to do everything for the sake of fulfilling their own political ambitions, which, unfortunately, are often fed from abroad." Putin clearly recognises that the moves from regime change on Syria are in fact moves to destabilise the situation around Russia, which will have the effect of destabilising Russia itself. And finally, a reminder for everyone to come and support Holly and Greg at the Royal Courts of Justice in London next Friday, the 2nd of March at 10 AM. I'm Malcolm Massey, and this has been the UK Column News.